Welcome back to the channel, guys. My name is Steve.
I'm Lindsay.
Today we're going to be reacting to, is the UK space industry about to take off? I came across this video and I realized I know nothing about the UK space industry, and so I thought this would be really interesting for us to check out.
Same. I didn't know there was one.
Yeah,
I mean, it
really
makes sense that there
It obviously
would be,
makes sense.
but
right, but it's just
don't
not.
Really hear about it much.
You know, I hear about SpaceX and we hear about things with NASA, for example, but you know, I really don't ever hear of anything coming out of the UK space-wise. Whether
and I'm
that's
sure there's been.
There has to be.
Yeah.
I mean, all the technology that has come out of the UK, it makes sense that you guys would have a space industry, but I just don't know how, you know, I guess
Extensive it is?
Yeah, how extensive the space industry is and how much money is funded into it.
I wonder when it started.
Yeah.
Like, I wonder when.
Yeah, I have no idea. I don't even know if this is private or public, kind of like NASA is versus, you know, Elon Musk's ventures and so forth. But
hopefully it'll explain.
Yeah, so guys, let's go ahead and dive in here and check out, is the UK space industry about to take off?
On a dark winter night in January 2023, 2,000 excited ticket holders crowded into an airport in the southwest of England to watch the first commercial satellite launch from UK soil.
So there she goes, carrying with her not just a 400-kilogram rocket, but the hopes of the British space industry too.
But the excitement quickly...
Did you see that? That was Virgin.
Yeah, I'm so confused. Richard
Branson's
airline.
Yeah, airline.
But why is the plane?
I remember now hearing something a while back where Richard Branson was planning on going to space or something. I don't remember. Yeah, let us know in the comments, guys. Is Richard Branson kind of going the same route that Elon Musk is going? Because I don't really know anything about it. So
turned to dismay as Virgin Orbit announced that a technical problem had prevented the aircraft from reaching space, leaving the 9 precious satellites.
Hold on. Does this say Space Force? Wait.
Forge.
Oh, Space Forge. It's got... Okay, this is interesting. Does the U.S. have something to do with this collaboration here or something? Are they, I mean...
I don't know.
I didn't know anything about this.
There's an American flag on there.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Let us know in the comments, guys. What's that about?
It carried to crash into the Atlantic Ocean.
When that second stage news came through that it had failed, it was heartbreaking. Me, my family, and all of the team that had come were all crying.
The expectation was that everything was going to work. So when things did fail and the launcher failed to achieve orbit, I think people were caught by surprise.
After the failure of Virgin Orbit's launch, many were wondering whether the fledgling...
Failure of Britain's first space launch. So that was the absolute first space launch period.
In 2023. Wow.
And I said it was going to be the first satellite they had sent into orbit. That's surprising to me, guys. I would have thought that you guys would have probably, you know, had, you know, done something along that lines at some point.
The UK space sector is similarly doomed. Despite being backed by billionaire Richard Branson, Virgin Orbit suspended operations and filed for bankruptcy protection months later. But what effect did this high-profile failure have on the UK space industry? We spoke to several startups busy getting their projects ready for liftoff.
All right, so I think we just got our answer.
It's starting.
Well, it sounds like it's pretty much all private and not public.
The original space race played out during the Cold War as the United States and the Soviet Union competed for 30 years to be first to reach a series of milestones. In 1962, the UK became the 3rd country to operate a satellite. But from the mid-1970s, tensions between the US and the USSR...
Okay, it said it was going to be the first satellite launch just in 2023.
Commercial. So
so the government basically has funded a satellite sent into orbit, or maybe multiple at this point. Maybe what we're talking about here is the first private
sector.
Okay, let us know in the comments, guys. I'm a little confused about that, but I think that's probably what it is.
Yeah.
Began to ease, paving the way for joint projects. While crewed missions continued, complex satellites to allow for improved navigation, communication systems, and weather forecasting were being manufactured. But even as commercial uses developed, satellite launches usually still relied on state-backed organizations in the US, USSR, Europe, and China.
When I was a boy, satellites were the size of a small car. Today, a satellite's the size of a cup of coffee. So ergo, they're cheaper and easier to launch. And satellite technology is used in everything from ATMs to smart fridges to GPSs, etc.
ATMs.
So it is this new industrial revolution.
To have your own satellite orbiting the Earth is to be part of an elite but ever-widening group. As of October 2023, there are around 12,000 space objects in orbit registered with the
That's so
United
crazy.
Nations, with Starlink, backed by billionaire Elon Musk, responsible for well over a third of these. Small
Dang.
communication
What?
satellites like
Didn't know that.
Starlink's constellations of broadband internet devices have driven the dramatic increase as people look to stay connected whilst on the move, even in remote areas. Amazon also has plans to launch thousands of small satellites to create a competing system. Between 1965, at the height of the space race, and 2012, the average number of objects launched into space remained stable at around 130 per year. But the last decade has seen a huge uptick in launches, the vast majority being for satellites. And this is a trend which shows no sign of slowing.
By the time we get to 2030, it could be as many as 100,000 satellites orbiting the Earth.
100,000?
Why do we need that many? I don't understand.
Well, I think they're talking about, like Elon Musk talks about wanting to connect the entire world. So if you're in the middle
That's
of
just
like,
what we need.
well,
We have no place to escape from technology.
now there is that. I agree with you to a certain extent, but you also got to think on the same hand, we are blessed that we have access to the internet and so forth. And a lot of places that are in very rural areas do not have that access. There's two sides to, to it. So you can look at the pros and the cons of that. I mean, I agree that technology is becoming, it's intruding on everything in our lives. And it's like, it would be nice to be able to have places where you can still go that there is no technology at all. But, I mean, let's be honest, it's probably not going to slow down. So,
and these low orbiting satellites have got to get up somehow.
Saxavord Spaceports CEO Frank Strang hopes this former Air Force base at the very northern tip of the Shetland Islands will become the site of the first successful orbital rocket launch from UK soil in 2024.
As you can see, we're on a very remote island, and we were looking for a key to regenerate the site. We've finished our first launch pad. We're very close to getting a spaceport license, so we're moving really quickly.
Objects have successfully been launched into space from planes, submarines, and from 28 ground sites around the world. Cape Canaveral in Florida holds the record with over 5,000 satellites sent into space since 1958. In the UK, there are plans for at least 7 launch sites, including the scene of Virgin Orbit's failure in Cornwall and Space Hub Sutherland, 200 miles south of Saxavord. Saxavord's northerly position means that rockets can safely be launched in a wide range of directions without flying over towns or cities. These include trajectories which are ideal for satellites taking images of sections of the Earth's surface at the same time each day, useful for surveillance, environmental monitoring, and weather observation. The UK government's aim is for the country to be the leading destination for commercial small satellite launches in Europe by 2030.
Okay, so now they're bringing the government into this. I was under the impression, based off the beginning of this video, that it sounded like this was completely private.
Right.
But now it sounds like the government is getting involved. So is there some sort of, public space program in the UK? Because it seems like this is mostly private.
Yeah, that's what it seems like.
So do you guys have your own version of NASA? Or are they planning on creating some sort of UK version of NASA?
But building a spaceport from scratch doesn't come cheap.
We've spent the best part of 24 million to date. By the time we finish the 3 launch pads, complete the public road improvements, build a launch control centre, tidy up the accommodation, you're going to be close to 45 to 46 million.
Frank and his team secured investment from their own billionaire backer, Danish-born Anders Holm Poulsen.
Industry and the government didn't believe that we existed or we were serious. So trying to persuade investors to invest in us was difficult. So we used our own money and went down a few rabbit holes, and eventually, bit by bit, people started to believe, and we got to the point where we are now, where we are very well financed.
So what's driving the race to build launch sites?
That is beautiful there.
During the Cold War, the American space industry was under the control of the federal government.
One giant leap for mankind.
But after Neil Armstrong became the first person to walk on the moon, NASA's budget was cut amid a loss of political support for space exploration. When NASA pulled back, private companies stepped in. Today, the new marketplace for space launches is dominated by SpaceX, one of Elon Musk's many firms. The company's reusable rockets help to lower the cost of each launch and capture a large share of the market in the process. Between 2013 and 2022, the cost of getting things into space fell by a third. The US's share of commercial launches has gone from 0 to 40% over the same period. Amazon founder and fellow US-based billionaire Jeff Bezos is also getting in on the act with Blue Origin, which also plans to launch satellites using reusable rockets.
I don't understand what the obsession is with launching things into space.
I mean, I get what you're saying. I mean, I understand the, satellites, wanting to have increased connectivity,
I understand it to a degree.
Which is what it sounds like the UK is initially trying to do here. Mm-hmm. But, I think you're talking about like the obsession with just space in general, mm-hmm. going, to the moon or whatever.
We have plenty of issues here on Earth.
No, it is true.
We should deal with.
Absolutely.
And the amount of money that is thrown into things like this, it's just kind of mind-blowing.
Some people are just interested in the exploration of space and, all that comes with it. I understand the connectivity part. But the idea of, I want to, see what's around the sun or something, that doesn't really, pique my interest, honestly.
I understand the connectivity part up to a certain point, but I think there comes a point where we need to step back and realize that technological advancement, there should be some sort of cutoff, because then you're going to run into...
Well, you're not talking about a cutoff from a governmental perspective saying, nope, you guys that are in the private sector can't do this. No. You're saying you wish people as humans, a whole would say...
we could, think a little bit more about where this is going.
Right.
You can always go forward more in the future, but once you're there, you can't go back.
Right.
So it's
I get what you're saying, because it's, you don't know what doors you're opening that potentially could be a negative.
Yeah.
Because, if it's something you really haven't done before or don't have much experience with as humans, there's no way to really understand exactly where it's going to go.
Right. 3/4 of all space-related spending is invested in developing, launching and operating spacecraft, satellites, subsystems and their complex payloads. And a range of UK-based companies, including Saxavord, are looking to get a slice of this increasingly accessible $280 billion industry, which is currently worth more than $20 billion per year to the UK economy and employs nearly 50,000 people locally. In fact,
the space industry in the UK employs 50,000 people? That's
big.
That's big. That's much bigger than I thought. Is there a public sector? Or is this all private? All 50,000 of those employees are private sector employees.
So my question, I don't know. My question is, how is this so lucrative? What are they making money off of? Selling the data? What are they?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I have no idea.
A fifth of the country's GDP, worth $450 billion, is underpinned by global satellite services. In charge of keeping the construction project at Saxavord on track is Elizabeth Johnson, whose grandfather farmed the land on which she's now building launch pedestals that rockets will take off from.
We're looking over my grandfather's land up at the top there. I think he would have been very pleased with the activity on this site.
Although the weather was ideal for building during our visit, the Shetland Islands are known for their windy climate and short winter days, providing additional challenges to any construction project.
At the moment, we're overlooking the foundations for our first hangar A. The foundations alone are probably about £1 million worth.
After being shipped up to Saxavord, launch vehicles will be assembled in a clean room inside this high-tech building before being loaded with satellites.
It's going to be a tight time scale to get everything done in the summer months that we need here.
Despite the substantial investment, launches will retain some risk.
something like 70% of first launches are going to fail. So prepare for that, but learn from the lessons.
650 miles south, in the capital city of Wales, satellite-making startup SpaceForge is all too aware of the challenges involved in a launch. Their first satellite, Forge Star 0, was lost in the failure of Virgin Orbit's January 2023 mission.
With the way that launch failed, we almost very nearly did get there. We did get to space. I think in the end it got to about 284 kilometers before that second stage failure happened. We gave the team a day off just to come to terms with all of that work being lost. And then we got down and got set and got ready and started building our next mission.
So.
CEO Joshua Weston and his team are now hard at work building a new, much larger prototype, which they hope will prove that their technology works. Because of the huge demand for launch slots, SpaceForge had actually booked the scheduled departure for this second satellite even before their initial attempt to launch with Virgin Orbit.
You know, to work in this type of industry, you have to have a certain type of personality because a lot of people couldn't deal with seeing that constant failure and then the long, tedious process of starting over and, you know, just starting in the first place.
And did you hear what they said? They had to book their second launch before they even launched the first one.
Oh, I didn't hear that.
Because the launch slots are so, I don't know what that means. I guess there's only so many places you can launch from.
Right.
It's so in demand, I guess.
Wow.
We booked this particular launch around 24 months in advance. You can get some incredibly late notice, a couple of months out, but the price goes up significantly, just like it does when you're trying to book a flight. So as SpaceForge, we've taken the decision to book flights really far in advance.
SpaceForge is designing its satellites to operate like tiny factories in space, making use of the permanent vacuum and lower apparent gravity experienced by objects in orbit. They plan to lease the satellite's capacity to manufacturers to create materials which are difficult or impossible to make on Earth, such as high-quality semiconductors, metal alloys, and exotic pharmaceuticals. The entire device will then be brought back from orbit and recovered, so the satellite can be reconditioned and reused.
The reason why we do this in space is because it is so much fundamentally better for the materials that we can create and the way that they get used.
There's also
I'm confused. So it's like a little factory that makes stuff up in space.
Is it like a 3D printer in space?
We know nothing about this, if you can't tell.
Yeah,
we're not the space type.
No, not really.
Like we don't focus on that very much. So it's all this is pretty much news to me.
Yeah, I mean, I know some things, you know, like every once in a while.
I do. But.
Yeah, I probably do, but this is definitely not something like I'm in the know about or something. But yeah, is he talking about basically like they're creating satellites that are 3D printers in space? That's like the only way I can imagine what he's saying.
I don't understand how sending it up into space is more efficient than just making it here.
I don't know. I really don't get it personally, but yeah, that sounds interesting.
Also an environmental benefit. While rocket launches may cause pollution, the overall carbon emissions from manufacturing semiconductors in space will be lower than if they had been made on Earth.
So for every kilogram of CO2 we create, we can actually prevent between 15 and 80 tons of CO2 being emitted.
Weston and his team are backed by investors from the UK, US and Germany, but don't have a billionaire on board just yet.
If anything, I point to a billionaire for a launch failure. We have not been shy from trying to do things on a shoestring, which is a rare thing you hear in a space company.
The idea of making satellites smaller and less expensive to launch by using cheaper, less complex components isn't entirely new. Spun out of the University of Surrey in the 1980s, Surrey Satellite Technology now has 4 decades of experience in building satellites in the UK.
So I think it's changed quite a lot, particularly in the last sort of 10 years, really coming along from the change in the mobile phone industry and how consumer electronics has changed and that driven the miniaturization of a lot of electronic parts.
But inexpensive is still a relative term, as SSTL's Chief Technology Officer Andrew Hazelhurst explains.
Generally speaking, you're looking at something like $5 to $20 million. Obviously, once we launch it, it goes into outer space, and then we can't get it back. So it's not like the car, where you service it over time, change the oil, change the wheels, etc. We have to make sure it's right from the beginning.
But even the most carefully manufactured satellites wear out eventually. With an ever-increasing number of objects occupying a few key orbital paths, regulators and industry players have begun to put an emphasis on making sure these don't become too congested.
What to do at the end of the mission is bring the spacecraft down into the atmosphere so it naturally will burn up within the atmosphere and won't have any debris making its way back here to Earth.
Another, much trickier option is to bring the satellite back to Earth intact.
That makes more
Imagine
sense to
every
me.
time you got on a flight, you threw the plane away when it landed. It wouldn't make any sense. Well, now imagine you throw the factory away, that every time it made a plane, you got rid of that too.
It's talking about it's making the parts for the future satellites in the satellite itself.
I don't know.
That's what it sounds like.
No, Inception.
Yeah, I have no idea.
SpaceForge is one of a number of companies working on technologies which will allow satellites to be diverted from their orbital path and then slow down enough as they enter the atmosphere that they can be recovered in one piece and either recycled or reconditioned for repeated use.
We go from about 50,000 miles an hour down to about 20 miles an hour in under an hour.
Whoa.
It's pretty intense braking. That then allows us to float all the way from space down to the ground.
All right, guys, that was interesting. Definitely learned quite a bit that I didn't know anything about.
And now I have more questions.
Yeah, definitely have a lot of questions. Might need to go back and look at this video from the beginning a little bit to kind of see what I missed here, because I'm now so curious how they said it was the first satellite launch in 2023, but then it seems like there's, you guys have been making satellites for decades.
Yeah.
And then there seems to have been some sort of public funding towards some sort of space industry, long ago as well. Let us know in the comments what exactly is going on with this. Do you guys actually have a public space industry, or is all of this just completely private? But I think that it makes a lot of sense for, satellites, just like all technology, to over time get smaller, get more efficient.
Yeah.
You're able to
streamline it a little more.
Right. And able to reuse these things. Not only, does that obviously waste less material over time, but it also just simply probably speeds up the process in building these
Saves on the
things.
manpower.
Right. All these things. But
finished product.
I'm also, another thing I'm not understanding exactly is what he means. There's basically a factor. They're sending up these factory satellites, I guess you would say.
Yeah,
and
what are they making? Didn't he say like prescription drugs and stuff though?
Did he?
I swear it said that. So it's like,
that's
I'm
weird.
a little confused. Maybe that's a part we need to go back to.
Yeah, but it also sounds like you said they're making the satellites themselves in space. I don't know. I have no idea, guys. This is so new to us. Please, guys, if you have any answers to our questions here, please feel free to drop them in the comment section, because, like we said, some of this was a little bit confusing, just like a lot of videos are. When you go into a video knowing nothing about the subject matter, you're paying attention, and everybody's attention goes to certain things, and other people's attention go to other things. And so you're usually not going to pick up everything unless you watch it multiple times.
Things are left out that are key pieces of information. So.
Yeah. So anyways, guys, thank you so much for stopping by. Please click that like button. Feel free to drop your comments or suggestions about this video or others. And don't forget to subscribe to continue to follow us on our journey to discover anything and everything from the UK and Ireland. Until next time, guys, peace.
To infinity and beyond. Bye.